So, you think T-Rex was the ultimate prehistoric predator? Think again. Today, we're going to talk about a creature that completely rewrote the rulebook on size, on power, and on terror. We're talking about the colossal snake, Titanoboa. Our story kicks off deep inside the Cerrejón coal mine in Colombia. Now, this place is basically a time capsule, a perfectly preserved 60-million-year-old rainforest. And as scientists were digging through these ancient layers, they pulled something out of the ground that just didn't fit. It was a fossil that didn't look like anything they'd ever seen before.
At first, nobody had a clue what to make of it. I mean, you can just imagine the scene, right? Once they cleaned off all the dirt, the debate started. Was it a bone from some ancient crocodile? Maybe part of a massive turtle shell? Or was it just a piece of petrified wood? Well, the truth turned out to be way more shocking than any of them could have guessed.
All right, so let's trace the journey of this thing. How does one single, confusing fossil go from being a total puzzle to an absolute scientific bombshell?
You know, this wasn't some sudden eureka moment. Way back in 1994, a geologist found one of these fossils and just kind of dismissed it, thinking it was an old tree branch. It literally sat in a box for almost 10 years. Then, in 2002, another one showed up. But it wasn't until 2007, when these fossils finally made their way to the Florida Museum of Natural History, that the real story began to click into place.
This was the moment of truth. The paleontologists took the fossil and placed it right next to a vertebra from a modern anaconda, one of the biggest snakes on the planet today. And they were just stunned. The fossil wasn't just a little bigger, it was a whopping 3 times larger and thicker. In that single instant, they knew they were staring at the remains of a snake unlike anything science had ever seen. And just like that, the scientific world had a new king, a creature so ridiculously immense it earned a name to match, Titanoboa, the Titanic boa.
So just how big are we talking? Well, using that single vertebrae, scientists ran the numbers and the results were just mind-boggling. They estimated its length was somewhere between 42 and 50 feet. To put that in perspective, that is longer than a city bus.
And it wasn't just long, it was incredibly heavy. Titanoboa weighed an estimated 1.2 tons. That's about 2,500 pounds. That's as much as a small car and 10 times heavier than the biggest anaconda. In fact, it was probably so heavy that its own body would have been crushed under its weight if it tried to move on land for too long.
This discovery sent massive shockwaves through the scientific community. The real question wasn't just that it was so big, but how? How on earth does a snake get that gigantic? And why don't we see anything like it today?
Well, the answer wasn't just in its genes or its diet. The secret ingredient that allowed Titanoboa to grow into an absolute monster was the world it lived in. See, it all comes down to a really simple biological idea. Snakes are ectothermic, which is the fancy way of saying cold-blooded. Unlike us humans, they can't make their own body heat. They are completely dependent on the temperature of the world around them to power their metabolism, to digest their food, and to grow. And here's the kicker. Titanoboa lived 60 million years ago, in a world that was much, much hotter than ours. The average temperature in its rainforest home was a sweltering 32 degrees Celsius. That's about 90 degrees Fahrenheit. This constant, intense heat basically supercharged its metabolism, letting it grow to a size that's physically impossible in today's cooler world.
I mean, just let that sink in for a moment. The Amazon rainforest, a place we think of as incredibly hot and humid, would have actually been too cold for Titanoboa. This was an animal that was perfectly built for an ancient hothouse Earth.
Okay, so if it was too heavy to move around on land, how did this beast hunt? Yeah, you can forget that Hollywood image of a giant snake crashing through the jungle. Titanoboa was a master of the water.
It hunted a lot like a modern crocodile, actually. It would spend almost all of its time in these murky, swampy waters, where its massive body was supported, which allowed it to be surprisingly fast and agile. It was an ambush predator. It would just wait, patiently, maybe for days, perfectly hidden, with only its eyes and nostrils sticking out above the surface.
And when some unsuspecting animal came to the water's edge for a drink, bam! The strike would have been lightning fast. But it's the crushing force that is just unbelievable. Models estimate its constriction put out over 400 pounds per square inch of pressure. That is like having 2 full-grown African elephants standing on your chest. Its prey wasn't suffocated. Its bones would have been instantly pulverized. So to fuel a body that massive, you've got to eat big, right? And Titanoboa's menu was filled with other giants that shared its swampy world, including ancient crocodiles and gigantic turtles that could grow up to 8 feet long. We're talking the size of a pool table.
For years, scientists were stumped. How did it actually eat these enormous animals? The huge breakthrough came in 2011 with the discovery of a Titanoboa skull. Now, a snake's skull is incredibly delicate and almost never survives to become a fossil. This 1-in-a-million find confirmed it. Its jaw could dislocate, just like a modern anaconda, allowing it to swallow prey a staggering 3 times wider than its own head.
So here you have it, a perfectly evolved apex predator. It had no enemies, it was the undisputed king of its world. So, what happened? Where did it go?
This is the final and kind of tragic chapter of its story. If this snake was so perfectly adapted, so utterly dominant, why isn't it still around? The answer is both incredibly simple and deeply ironic.
The world changed. The very thing that made its gigantic size possible, that extreme global heat, ended up being its downfall. As the planet slowly started to cool, Titanoboa's supercharged metabolism ground to a halt. It couldn't digest food, it couldn't move as fast, its swampy hunting grounds started to dry up, and a whole new class of animal, mammals, started to rise up and compete for food.
And that's the great irony here. For a creature of such epic, unimaginable proportions, its downfall was caused by something that seems so small. A drop of just a few degrees in the planet's average temperature was a death sentence, turning the world's greatest snake into a fossil.
It really leaves us with a fascinating thought, doesn't it? Titanoboa was a monster born from a hotter world. As our own planet's climate continues to change, it kind of makes you wonder, what kind of giants might the future bring?